Hi, this is Mr. Sapone here, and I've got my eye on you. So today we're going to look at a PowerPoint and a presentation, and we're going to learn about ions in chemistry, and we're going to see some very terrible puns along the way. So an ion is an atom with a plus or a minus charge, because an atom can gain or lose electrons, and when it does so, it becomes electrically charged, and we'll see what we mean in a second. So there's going to be two types of ions. A regular ion is an atom with a plus or a minus charge, and that means it has a different number of protons and electrons. Each proton has a +1 charge in an atom, and each electron has a -1. If the number of protons and electrons balances, then an atom will be electrically neutral. But some atoms are going to gain electrons, and some atoms are going to lose electrons, and we're going to form ions. Two types of ions, cations and anions. Cation is going to be an ion with a positive charge. One way to remember this is there is a T in the word cation, kind of looks like a plus sign. That means the atom has more protons than electrons, so it's positively charged. Another mnemonic or bad pun is that cats have paws, and cations are positive. Hey, I told you the puns were going to be terrible. And then there's anions. You could think of this like a negative ion. Anions are going to have a negative charge, and that means the atom has more electrons than protons. And a negative ion, and as one student told me, shout out to Taylor, the word anion looks like the word onion, and onions make you cry, so they must be negative ions. So whatever you got to do to remember it, you do what you got to do. So here we have a, looks like a periodic table box. We have oxygen, and we want to figure out how many protons, neutrons, and electrons a neutral oxygen atom would have. And recall this number right here is the atomic number and the number of protons. The neutron number is going to be the difference between these two numbers, because this right here, the weighted average, is the total number of protons and neutrons, but I know 8 of these 16 must be protons. If this atom is neutral, it's got to have the same number of protons as electrons. So we have essentially 8 protons in the nucleus. That's +8. Each one of these particles represents a proton. There's 8 of them. And there's going to be 8 neutrons. Neutrons have 0 charge, so we didn't put any charge there. And there's going to be 8 electrons. And we see that this balances completely. There's 8 positive particles equaling a +8. 8 negative particles equaling a -8. The net charge in this atom is 0. It's neutral. What would happen if oxygen gained an electron? What would the net charge on this atom be? Well, right now we have one more positive particle than negative particle. So oxygen is going to have a -1 charge, or as we write in chemistry, a 1- charge. We kind of write it backwards in chemistry, just something you got to get used to. Instead of saying -1, we call it 1- when we're doing charges on atoms. What if oxygen gained 2 electrons? Normally it has 8 protons, 8 electrons, but for whatever reason, which we're not talking about right now, it gains 2 electrons. What's its charge? Well, in this case, we have 2 more negative particles than positive particles. So oxygen is going to have a -2 charge, or a 2- as we write it in chemistry. So we write the symbol, and we put the charge to the top right of it. We do not need to put a box around it like this. That's not necessary, but I just put them there for the visual effect. But oxygen with a 2- charge. Lithium, number 3 on the periodic table, so lithium has 3 protons. That's a +3 charge. This atomic mass right here, average atomic mass is a 7, so we can say lithium has probably 4 neutrons, the most stable form of it. And of course, if it's neutral, we're going to have 3 electrons. They're going to balance out, they're going to cancel out with the protons. Now, what would happen if lithium actually lost an electron? And lithium does like to lose electrons. If it loses an electron, it now has 2 negative particles, but 3 positive particles. So the charge on lithium is going to be a +1 or a positive charge. And that would be a cation, because it's an atom with a positive charge, more protons than electrons. So here we see sodium, just general idea of what these atoms represent. If it has a positive charge, that means the proton number has to outnumber the electron number. So we have 1 less electron than proton. That means sodium lost an electron. Magnesium +2, it must have 2 more protons than electrons, and magnesium is not going to gain or lose protons, because then it's going to change its identity. So it's really the electrons that are being lost or gained. This magnesium has to have 2 less electrons than protons to have a +2 charge. Fluorine has a -1 charge, which means there needs to be an extra negative particle. So fluorine actually gained an electron. And nitrogen must have gained 3 electrons, or has 3 more electrons than protons. So atoms lose or gain electrons. Remember, the proton number isn't changing. We're not changing the number of protons to find the charge. Proton number is what defines an element. So, alright, so now we're going to solve some of these problems. I usually give you problems like these. And recall that the number of protons minus the number of electrons will always equal the charge on an atom. So this atom has 9 protons, which are going to be a +9. And there's going to be 10 electrons, which will be a -10. So the charge in this atom should be a -1. And if we look on the periodic table, we should see an element with 9 protons, and that will be fluorine. So this is going to be a F-, fluorine anion. If we wanted 19 protons, we look on the periodic table, that should be potassium. So we end up with 19 here. The symbol for this is K. And potassium has a +1 charge, which means it must have 1 more proton than electrons. It can only be 18 electrons, because you have 19 positive charges. How many negatives do you have so that the overall charge is a +1? Well, there can only be -18, because 19 minus 18 is a 1. So that's potassium +1. And barium, I only remember its atomic number from the song. Barium is 56. It's where the periodic table splits. So barium is 56. So I know barium has 56 protons, which means if barium was neutral, it would have 56 electrons. But barium has a +2 charge, which means the proton number's got to be 2 bigger than the electron number. So there's only 54 electrons, and the charge is, of course, 2+ or +2. So that's how we do these. That's how we do ions. When we want to know about ions, we're just comparing the number of protons and electrons in an atom. And you could always figure out the charge by using proton number minus electron number, or you can just, a lot of times, just do it in your head. You know, if there's 9 positive particles, 10 negative particles, the charge must be a -1. And we didn't really talk about why atoms gain or lose electrons right now, but we're just kind of going through charges on ions and some very bad puns. This is Mr. Stapone.